Good morning again. Welcome, one and all. Hello, Sister Lou. Good to have you online with us. Welcome to our Adult Sunday School for the last Sunday of the year, December 29th, 2024. So we are going to continue our look across the Bible timeline. We are in the book of Exodus, chapter 19. We are in the year 1446 BC. We are with the Israelites as they have finally arrived at Mount Sinai and are ready to go from here and see what the Lord has for them now that they've made this 60-day journey to arrive here. So, 1446 BC, still in Middle Bronze Age 2B now, with the Amalekites heading over and becoming the Hyksos. We'll get to that. China's being led by Wai Ren as emperor of the Shang dynasty. Egypt is being led by the natives. Ibi something, the name gets corrupted in our records. Ibi something Matra is the new pharaoh of the 13th dynasty of the native Egyptians in their second intermediate period. They've been pushed on further south after being devastated by the Exodus events, and they've been pushed further south by these foreigners coming in. These foreigners coming in include the Amalekites that the Israelites fought on their way out of Egypt as they're making their way into Egypt. So this new group of Amalekites and others comes in, and they become the 14th dynasty of Egypt, ruling in the north. These are the early Hyksos. And so we've got the two different dynasties and pharaohs ruling. We've got of the 14th dynasty, Pharaoh Nubu-Suri-Ya'amu. I'm glad I have that written because I would not remember that. Over in Babylon, in the Bible lands, Babylon is being led by King Amiditana, who is the great grandson of Hammurabi. We'll talk about his law code as we get to the law of Moses. In the line of Christ from the tribe of Judah, we have Aminadab, who I'm thinking is about 98 years old by now. His son Nahshon, about 39. Nahshon is the leader of the tribe of Judah. He's the 28th generation of Adam. And looking ahead, he will be grandpa to Boaz from the account of Ruth. So before we get into Exodus 19, let's continue. We've been taking a look these last few weeks at the ending sections of the film Patterns of Evidence, Journey to Mount Sinai 2, looking at the exploration of the Jebel Lawz range, specifically Jebel Makla in Saudi Arabia, as the potential actual Mount Sinai of the scriptures. So we'll take another look here. Let me share my screen. This, there we are. So their 60-day journey brought them all, let's get that down there. So their 60-day journey brought them across here, 20 days, 18 days to reach here. They crossed by day 20. Come on down by day 60. They've made it over here to Sinai, and that's where we are exploring now. So let's go take a look at this next section of the film, Patterns of Evidence, Journey to Mount Sinai 2, and take a look at some more items of interest for this potential Mount Sinai candidate. We left off talking about the altar, potential altar that was found there, and we'll continue going from that into some other neat stuff. So here we go.
What you really need to do is say, okay, I'm going to excavate here. The surface material is Nabatean. Stuff underneath it may be bronzy. We don't know how deep that stuff was. They didn't conduct a deep enough excavation. For whatever reason, I don't want to speculate on that, but, it's just difficult to say.
If it is possible that this structure is much older, the question remains, what was it used for? There's this long stone structure that has a sort of an L shape to it. I don't know if you've seen that.
It looks nothing like an altar that I've ever seen. It looks like it's a Nabatean quarry that we're dealing with here, where the workmen would have slept in this bivouac, a sort of place with the low walls which would protect them from the wind and possible creatures like snakes, etc. And they would have had a canopy over the top of it. And at one end of it, there's a narrow gap with some ash on the far side. Well, that's a kitchen.
Again, the critics will say, well, this is just some type of living structure. That's not like any living structure that I've ever seen. And there was a stream that runs right next to it. And it actually mentions in Deuteronomy that there was a stream that came down the mountain. So really, everything is there. So what was this structure? I headed to Colorado to meet with Temple Grandin, an American scientist and cattle expert. Her life story dealing with autism was told in the feature film Temple Grandin, played by Claire Danes. Her unique insights into animal behavior revolutionized cattle slaughter practices around the world. Down in here, it looks as if, in this area, it looks like there was burning and
Well, they
bones and that
verified
type of
those
thing.
burning stuff there? Is that been verified?
Archaeologists have,
They verified that?
yeah, yes.
If this was a livestock facility, the reason you make it this design would be so that the animals entering here don't see the activity here.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually laid out single file chutes that had a bend like that. Sheep and cattle both have a natural behavior to want to go back to where they come from. So this is the reason why I've designed cattle handling facilities so that are curved to take advantage of that natural tendency to go back to where they come from.
What I found curious is that the walls were only about 3 feet high, and in Exodus 20:24, God mentions offerings of sheep.
It's 8 foot wide, and if you were handling sheep in groups, 8 foot wide would be what you'd make the corridor.
Why 8 feet?
Because I can bring the groups up really easily in that.
Okay.
And bring a bunch up at a time. There's a lot of livestock things that have an 8 foot wide
Yeah.
corridor.
Yeah.
That's common. Now, I want to make it very clear, I'm not saying this is definitely a handling facility.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't have enough of the other information, but other stuff they found at the site.
Yeah. But the curiousness of it for
It's sort of a weird layout. It's like, what else would you use it for?
Yeah.
I don't know. You tell me that ancient ash was found at the end of this 8 foot wide chevron shaped corridor. Yeah, it's possible they could have used it for sacrifices.
What about the 12 pillars at the proposed altar site?
These are small marble pillars and they're lying randomly around the altar structure, which you can see to the right.
Some explorers think these marble pillars may have been the 12 pillars erected by Moses, but others note that they have been carved, which does not really fit the normal definition of masabah, or standing stones in the days of Moses, which is translated as pillars in this verse. But the thing is the pillars would have been valuable. Why were they left there?
Well, that's the big question. My suspicion is that the pillars that Moses erected were uncut rocks or a single rock for each tribe. And that goes back to Jacob. When he erected a masabah and anointed it, it was just an unhewn stone. It was a field stone.
These marble pillars found near the base of the stone structure were taken from a quarry up the ravine. So is there a connection between this quarry, these pillars, and the story of the Exodus?
There's a connection in that I believe it memorialized the Exodus. And I believe in those early centuries AD that the Jews still knew where Mount Sinai was. It probably was designed to be a small open air synagogue. But I don't think it was ever finished because I don't see any signs of any type of solid foundation. That's just a guess. But the incomplete cuttings in the quarry and the disarray structurally at the base of the mountain gives me that idea.
If it's not part of the story of the Exodus, then somebody went to a lot of trouble to drag that marble to that site for some other reason. And
leave it there.
And leave it there.
The Albert investigation concluded these marble columns were discarded from the workers of the quarry during the Nabatean period. They didn't speculate about their intended use. I find these carved pillars very intriguing, but although some argue otherwise, I'm not sure they fit the definition of masabah or standing stones, like I've seen in Har Karkum. Shechem.
I'm going to pause right there real quick. On the right, that stone there is Shechem. Everything points to that being the stone of Joshua, the covenant stone of him bringing all the people together after they have conquered the land. And so we'll get to that more when we get to that point in the Bible story, but I just, since it was right there, wanted to take that opportunity to point that out.
and Gezer. That being said, could there be evidence of standing stones in this area below the surface, waiting to be found?
Second time we went into the site, once we entered the valley, within 15 minutes, the Bedouin were on us. He drew his weapon. His son drew a shotgun, and within minutes, another vehicle pulled up. They had weapons, and we were arrested. They took us one truck in front, one behind my vehicle, through the desert to a Frontier Forces outpost.
The mother instinct would kick in with me, and I would think to myself, what are you doing? Why are you putting your kids through this? People would come to me and say, guns pointed near your children and you're taking them back. Have you lost your mind? I can't explain to you why we feel this is so important that I would risk what we're risking to do this.
Oh, you need?
But at the same time, there was such a drive to do this. Sometimes people talk about they feel like they're on a mission from God. Well, you laugh at that and you think that's a ludicrous thing. And yet that's almost what this felt like, because when we were going and doing these trips, we were almost fearless.
Despite the danger, the Caldwells returned to the mountain 15 times to document the archaeological remains in the area. They were driven, just like so many others from all over the world, to search for the Exodus. Maybe we're all searching for things to get us closer to God.
This Bible is not just story or history. It is true stories. What I found out, what is written in the Bible, everything is, I can show you. This one is true stories. So that's why what I believe, God is warning to the people, listen or not listen, what's true stories.
The Exodus is the first time in recorded history where God tells a nation to come and worship Him and Him alone. According to the biblical text, on the third day after their arrival, Moses gathered the Israelites at the foot of the mountain, and God came down in fire and smoke and spoke to the people. The terms of the covenant were presented to the Israelites in 10 commandments. The first of these being that they would have no other gods and make no idols. And the Israelites agreed, but that didn't last very long. Is there evidence for golden calf worship? DeMille's 1923 version of the 10 Commandments was one of the first to portray these events for the cinema. Moses went up to the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, where he received written tablets of the 10 Commandments.
When the people saw that Moses was delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us gods who shall go before us." So Aaron said to them, "Take off your rings of gold and bring them to me." He received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool, made a golden calf, and they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play.
Okay, we've come into an area called Jebel Laws. In this area, we found a fenced-off archaeological site. Got some rock carvings. We can't get into the area, but we can see what we need to see through the fence. Get the best views that I can get on the top area there.
You look across the valley and you see this big pile of stones that goes up 30 feet, and it's this big monolith that comes out of the sand, and it has bulls inscribed on the side of it and pictures of bovine all around this altar site.
Many of the Exodus explorers believe the worship of the golden calf happened at this pile of boulders because of these depictions of bulls, as well as other bull inscriptions nearby.
So the Bible says that the golden calf altar was in front of the actual golden calf. So if the golden calf was up there on the platform, like you would assume, so everyone could see it and worship it, then there should be a separate altar section in front of it.
David Roll, however, sees no connection.
I personally found thousands of rock carvings of bulls and cattle. Huge ones, you know, 1.5 meters, 2 meters wide. It's very, very common in that region. It's got absolutely nothing to do with Moses and the Bronze Age. It's actually the Stone Age we're dealing with.
Egyptian culture practiced the worship of many gods, including bulls and cows. A person with raised arms was a common way to portray praise. After centuries of living in Egypt, the Israelites would have been very familiar with these forms of worship.
If you look at Egyptian religious iconography, I've got this picture from the tomb of Pharaoh Seti. It's very specific. It's got a picture of a person actually underneath the cow. You've got a person behind the cow holding the tail. Very specific imagery. When you look at some of the murals that are surrounding the golden calf altar, you have these exact images. You have a person underneath the cow, exactly like what we see in the Valley of the Kings. We see pictures of people holding the tails of the cows. This is Egyptian religious iconography. This is not just farmers or hunting scenes or this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a good pausing place for this week. Next week will be the final section of the film. But reactions, thoughts, comments, questions, or is anyone lost or confused? Anything from anyone on what we've just seen? You ready for the quiz, Sister Alyssa? Sister Peggy.
But there obviously was a platform there.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another one in front of it,
Mm-hmm.
to the side. Just depends on which area they considered front.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that would be whatever way the bull was facing.
Right.
But then that they were different on their views of that.
Yes.
It really looks like that.
Now, I appreciate you bringing that out very much. And I appreciate filmmaker Timothy Mahoney showing people with different perspectives and allowing the audience to come to their own conclusions. In fact, for the release of this film, these two films for Journey to Sinai had little scorecards where you can put your own evals of what you were seeing here on these different candidates that he went through. But regarding Egyptologist David Roll versus others, as we know, I've referenced him a lot through our classes, certainly up to this point. And as much as I absolutely am grateful for him, respect him, have corresponded with him over email on some different things, this is where, as Timothy Mahoney points out in these films, there are two basic different approaches when it comes to the whole Exodus thing. There's what he refers to as the Egyptian approach, and then there's the Hebrew approach. The Egyptian approach, keep in mind, David Roll being an agnostic, being an Egyptologist, he's along the lines of that Egyptian school of thought, which is basically whatever happened was small scale and low key and natural explanations and closer to Egypt. The Hebrew approach basically says, for all the different extremes that are mentioned in the Bible that aren't exaggeration, the Bible is pretty much a literal book. For everything to have happened, it could only be ultimately supernatural in this Exodus account, especially the parting of the sea. And all these things explain it can only be, everything lines up with the Gulf of Aqaba for the sea crossing, and therefore a Mount Sinai that is to the east of the Gulf of Aqaba. And so those are the two different approaches. So David Roll, coming from the Egyptian approach, he says this can't be. Well, just the fact that he has seen, and he's right, he has seen these bull carvings all over the place in his surveys and studies, absolutely true. That doesn't mean this isn't something unique. So what is unique about this? As Joel Richardson points out, well, for one thing here, this isn't just drawings of cows and bulls. What you see here is something very specific. You see exactly what you see in Egypt, cow worship, cow goddess Hathor and all that, what you see is example. He says you see someone standing under the cow. Well, that's not sacrificing the cow. That's holding up the cow's tail. That's all. Those are all forms of worship. And what was the incident at the base of Mount Sinai was golden calf worship. And so these things kind of point to this might be where it happened. Can I say 100% this is it? No. But for me, because of, I agree, I lean towards Joel Richardson's point that this seems to fit the scripture with the worship. This isn't like just other drawings that don't have that worship factor. Sister Peggy.
Sacrifices. It's with sheep, birds, things like that. Cows were not talked about as far as, I mean, they're big and hard to carry one off, but I mean, like, where does the bull image come from?
Short answer is Egypt. And so with this, and it's more the female goddess Hathor, but you also have the Apis bull who's associated with the pharaoh, and that will be buried with the pharaoh at the time of. So you've got those things too. Keep in mind, I don't have the slide ready offhand, but there's a scene talking about from the film the Moses controversy about Moses being able to record and write down the books of the Bible in the 1400s BC with the world's earliest alphabet, the Proto-Sinaitic, the Proto-Hebrew, that looks to have been invented by Joseph for the practical purpose, with God's inspiration of adapting, simplifying Egyptian hieroglyphs to be able to be accessible for an alphabet that's never been seen before in the world, so that Moses would then have that to be able to write down the books of the Bible, so that the people in Egypt, without having to learn Egyptian hieroglyphs, because that was a very elite school who could do that, being able to communicate and function in their Egyptian society. And so them coming into this, so the slide that I don't have here to pull up, it shows that in Proto-Sinai, their first letter, the Aleph, is a cow's head. It's a bull's head with the horns. And they show this slide I've got, a snapshot from the film, shows the evolution of that symbol, that letter, over the course of time, from the Proto-Sinaitic to the ongoing forward to where eventually you get into from Proto-Canaanite to Proto-Hebrew. Then you get into the different versions, the Phoenician and then the Greek, finally to what we have in our Arabic or English. And what happens with that bull's head is it gets turned and shortened to where it flips upside down. Basically, our capital letter A, you flip it upside down, it's a bull's head. And so I have a joke with that so alpha male is just really a bullheaded and so this idea, now keep in mind, more often it was the sheep that were sacrificed and the cows that were worshipped. And so there's a distinction between sacrifice and worship. But yeah, this whole focus is again taking away from God and his call.
So is it because the bull was an important part of their livelihood, as they looked at it as strength, as alpha, dominance or something? I mean, I don't know, I mean, why not a bird of prey? Yeah, or a ram or things. I guess it's just how we place significance on certain things.
Well, hey, Benjamin Franklin wanted our national icon to be the turkey.
Yeah, I guess that's.
Beef is very tasty.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, so it just came out of their natural, what was in their natural environment.
Exactly. And we look to the natural kingdom, the animal kingdom around us, and we draw symbolism from that. Horns, like bucking, ram's horns bucking, a symbol of power and strength. So you'll see reference to horns as far as the strength and power of a nation or a person. The horn is raised up and things like that. And so the Antichrist is described as a little horn that comes up and then grows from there. And so not only do you've got the ram's horns for that, but you've also got, the bulls for that symbol of strength and all that. And you've also got the worship extended there with the cow goddess Hathor as well. So you've got all of this imagery from God's creation that gets perverted into worship of the creation and not the creator, taking the eyes off the creator. And that's exactly what, of course, as we get to it, we'll see what happens with the golden calf worship, which may have been at this place, maybe not, but was at the base of the mountain nonetheless, is the main point. And so it's fun and exciting to see with this the different possibilities and potential candidates. But again, the whole point is God's calling these people together and human nature playing out. We can't wait 40 days and 40 nights. And so we whip this up and say, here it is, ta-da, something of our own making, attempts to be our comfort versus God who's delivered us through the miracles and never failed us. Any other reactions, thoughts, comments, questions to anything from this section of the film? Yeah.
Seems like that. The land is massive.
Yes.
Very flat.
Yes. It can hold like 2.5 million people. That's the goal. That's what we're talking about. If we saw none of this, we would be fine and dandy because we take God's word at face value. He said it, it's never failed, and so we accept it. This isn't giving us a faith we didn't have before. This is just, again, I keep going back to the scientific revolution, where intelligent, God-fearing, God-loving men weren't searching out these things to create a faith. They were searching out these things to glorify God and see the details and how he accomplished what we've already accepted he's accomplished. We've already accepted what happened in the Bible happened. But to be able to go there and see it, to take these virtual field trips and be able to kind of, like kids see with their hands, to be able to make it, to add a visual to the words, to kind of hope, as you said, bring it to life. That's my goal in all of this. And to understand it's a Bible, not a bubble. None of these things happened in isolation. The people of the Bible absolutely affected the world around them, and the world around them absolutely affected the people of the Bible.
It just when you come across people, daily life, they're just so skeptical of this. And when you think about just the billions of people that Christianity has affected and impacted over the course of, our history. And then you meet people that are just like, nah, those were just a bunch of old stories. Talk about putting things in a box or putting things in a bubble. I mean, even when you look at other faiths that might not necessarily, be Christian, but still believe in the God of Abraham or whatever, are you saying that their, religion? I mean, because we're talking about billions of people, and then to look at the historical record and how all of these things link together, then just to kind of casually say, nah, there's nothing to all that. It's, it's just a bunch of gobbledygook. There's no God. There's no, I believe in science,
So do I. So does God.
Just, you always keep saying, how many coincidences do you need? So to me, it's easier to believe in this, which is like Sister Peggy says, you can see it and it brings it to life, than it is to believe in some other, explanation that you have to jump through a bunch of hoops to come to.
Keep in mind, atheism is a religion. It is a belief system based on it is a faith-based interpretation of some evidence. The exact same evidence can be taken with a biblical point of view, and it fits without having to force a bunch of things to make it work, Brother Clay.
It just, that point in history, we are in that area.
Yeah.
You think the climate, the terrain was different?
Nope.
So
not a whole lot, not as much as we might think.
Well, that's where manna fed the people.
Miracle from God, yes.
What did fed the animal?
What we've seen in these past sections of the film, as well as what we've read, is the vegetation. There's year-round vegetation there. There is year-round water there. Well, there are animals like frogs who depend on that, who are there. Yeah, if that stuff weren't there, you wouldn't see frogs, for example.
Well,
So
that's fine, but a herd, there's animals eat a lot.
Mhm.
Okay, that's why, like in BLM land in Nevada and in California, whatever, graze so many.
That was Bureau of Land Management. That wasn't that.
You graze so many cattle, you have to have so many thousand acres.
Mhm.
Cattle, and.
Which is what they have here at the base of
That's what I see pictures of modern day
the.
India or over in the Middle East, all you see is sand and
Mhm.
concrete building, and then what do they eat? What is, that kind of thing, and so that's where my mind goes when I see, like their picture of the altar or what they may be the altar, I just see rocks.
Mhm. Well, that's what the altar God said to make it out of, which is also what they had there to work with.
Well, I mean, the
Now, not only does the God's word tell us about God's miraculous provision, including the manna and things like that. So here's the area for the cow drawings. Here's the altar of Moses. And there's the plateau where the elders will go up to, and then there's the top there. And we'll spend some more time going into all of that. But you see here, all this plain area around it, and there's a scene in the film that showed it, color coded, plenty of room for the 2.5 million people. But keep in mind, there is something that was done, shepherds and pastoralists, that Moses did for 40 years before his 40 years in Midian, before he even left for the Exodus. Why was Moses there? If Moses was in Midian, which is down here, here's the wilderness of Sin, which means east of the Gulf of Aqaba, the Yam Suf. If Moses was in Midian, what with Jethro, as tending to the flocks and all that stuff, why was Moses suddenly over at Mount Sinai to discover the burning bush?
higher elevation for the animals.
Bingo.
Right.
Which means there's something there for the animals, to answer your question. Exactly. Which is why it makes no sense for following the Bible for Mount Sinai to be where it's traditionally expected, right there at St. Catherine here, because that would mean Moses went all the way up here, went all the way around here and came down here. Well, there's plenty of stuff right here. So while us in the 21st century looking at pictures of rocks and dirt areas, there are animals that live in the desert. There are desert vegetations. And so there was not only God's miraculous provision, there was all his logistical provision as well. Everything that's said in the Bible does fall in this area. There's nothing in the Bible we have to ignore or pretend isn't there in order to make this work. And we don't have to add a bunch of stuff to make it work either. It's all there and it fits. Does that kind of help with that?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, you have no idea how large the herd is.
Yeah. Well, when you got 2.5 million people, you got a lot of sheep and cows along with you too. And so keep in mind, as we've seen in the film, when folks are over there, this is also in the springtime. This is also, with snow melting and all of that stuff as well. This is a time of year when it is more lush and there is more water and plant life and all of that as well, which is why they're coming up here as the snow is melting and watering and providing for all of this. So all of that was here to be seen, and it's not simply the rocks and dirts that we're used to thinking of when we think of high desert areas. Sister Peggy. Sure.
There's no vegetation. And it was very interesting. This was more recent, probably like 10 years ago, because they still do have, sheep and goats and herdsmen and all of it.
Yeah.
And but I was amazed by the fact that under those rocks, spraying green grass.
Yes.
Green grass.
Yes.
Right.
Crawled out from underneath these rocks. And they were saying that is what they would, the sheep graze on.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's why they stayed out there for days and days and days and days. I don't know. But that made more sense to me because I was
Yes.
like,
Oh yeah.
And so and in a deep moist spot would be under rock.
Absolutely.
So they showed how their sheep and things like that would graze, and I did find that very interesting.
Speaking of grazing, one of the things we do in our household is our cats are on a diet of 5 ounces of cat food a day. So we've got cans of cat food that are 3 ounces each. So we spoil them and they get a total of 6 ounces. So 2 cans. Yeah.
Still fast, but.
And so what we do is in the morning, we get them 2 sessions of half a can, and then in the evening, 2 sessions of half a can. Where am I going with this? Well, when we got the half cans out from their morning feeding, we call it first breakfast. Then the cans are sitting out there waiting for us to later give them second breakfast, or same thing in the evening. Well, last night, as we're coming off of the day we've had, more on that later, Ashley lets me know your son knocked us over there. So we saw that the boy cat Noctis pick up the can and take it over to where he eats. My point is, animals know how to graze and where to find food, and or under the rocks or whatever. And so this fancy phrase for the shepherds taking the flocks up there, the phrase is vertical transhumance. And so it is a real thing. We've also seen footage where these Exodus explorers, we saw, I believe it was the Caldwells, them in their car driving in the rain, and ice was building up on their outside their dashboard on the windshield. We saw Timothy Mahoney walking with Dr. Leonard Mullert, and they're walking in the rain, and then there's thunder and lightning. You know, and so precipitation, snow, and all that stuff, that does, moisture, that does happen here, especially in the springtime, which is when the Exodus took place. So they're coming here. The Exodus was, Passover was the 14th of Nisan, so it'd be March, April timeframe. And then they left on the 15th, the very next day, 60 days later. So we're coming off of the spring into the early summer here, when all that moisture would have had its effect. And so very obviously God knows what he's doing with his creation, also with his supernatural provision. Remember, after they leave Mount Sinai for the 38-year wandering for a total of 40 years in the desert here, their clothes did not wear out, their shoes did not wear out. So the supernatural provision, just like the manna, as well as God's natural provision as well. Any other reactions, thoughts, observations, comments, questions? Yes, Sister
I
Ashley.
know you and I have already talked about it, and I just wanted to talk, to comment on Temple Grandin.
Yeah.
I love hearing her speak, and she is actually an atheist. I've got her biography that she wrote. She is autistic, and her story with animal husbandry is just incredible. So it's interesting to me to hear her say, okay, hang on a second. So this is what they found. They proved this, but then she's like, well, but I don't know.
What else could, but then she also says, I don't know what else it could be.
Exactly.
If this is what it was, it completely fits.
The way that she looks at things, her life story.
She's an animal whisperer.
Yeah, absolutely. And she revolutionized the way that slaughterhouses are
Humane practices.
And she talks a lot about, how animals are, butchered in the meat industry. And she did this as a woman with autism coming up in a time when women were just not in this field, And I just, like I say, I love listening to her. I wonder after this if it, struck any chord with her, I would love it to, as she's, aging herself and, thinking about these things. But it also helps me just on a because I'm nothing in the grand scheme of all this stuff, but I detest the thought of animal sacrifices. I detest it. But when you talk about animals and the amount of resources that would have to go for animals and all this stuff, God is a God of order. So
yes.
You cannot have chaos with all these critters, right?
Right.
So especially when you're dealing with something like animal sacrifices, and that was one of the things that she talked about, with the packing houses or the slaughterhouses, is the animals sense the stress. And when she talks about the curves and all of this stuff, that's done so it can be done humanely and quickly and with as less stress to the animals. And I thought about that because I worked for a family that kept a kosher, a kosher household. And kosher practices are when they butcher animals or a lot of people consider them very inhumane, and there are inhumane,
Sure.
people that do, but.
Unfortunately.
If it's done properly, and if you listen to how she talks about it, if it's done properly, the animals are put down very quickly and with minimal, because like I say, you couldn't have a whole bunch of, ruckus when you're trying to do these rituals,
And that's also very true of the kosher practices.
Yeah, exactly. So I just have to comment on that because like I say, especially knowing that eventually it's going to come back into play and as I've been doing a little bit of reading about it, I guess it's very important to the Jewish people to be able to do this again. And I'm just like, I don't want to see that. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to talk about that, but I know that that's going to kind of play out, eventually.
And real quick on these, with these sacrifices, I want to tie in the book of Hebrews here, perfectly titled, and relate this to the Lord's Supper here. The Lord's Supper, we know there's no magic in the cracker and the juice. We get that. And just as they recognize and were told to recognize, as was told in the book of Hebrews, it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to cleanse from sin. And so these things, what's the point then? These things are to be memorial. These things are to be pictorial. These things are to be hands-on, making it just like adding visuals here to what we read in the Bible is to make it more alive for us, bring it to life. So too, the sacrifice of an animal, keep in mind the Passover lamb was brought into the house for 3.5 days, before the sacrifice. That's kind of personal. It was to be a personal sacrifice. So bringing it home is the point of the animal sacrifice then and in future in the temple, the millennial temple of Ezekiel and all that stuff. Everyone's going to see who didn't see it before. I get it now. This was all pointing to Christ, the ultimate Passover lamb sacrifice. We take the Lord's Supper twofold. We take it rejoicing over the sacrifice for our salvation from sin and hell, but we also take it knowing that he purchased his bride and he brought us out to bring us in, which is one of my favorite phrases from scripture as well. So it's all pointing to Christ. And so remember, as I've talked about signs, whether it's the signs of the miracles in the early church with the healings and the tongues and all that stuff, a sign is not the end point. That's the whole point of a sign, is to point to something else. So we don't stop at the sign. The whole point is to look to what the sign is pointing to. And in all these cases, it's pointing to Christ. Sister Peggy. Temple Grandin.
She is the reason. It's not just for slaughtering the animals, but when we were on the milk, we had on the milk there, and they made a circular area for milking cows. Because when she saw that she was walking through a dairy, she was like, the squares are not natural. That's not natural. And so they made like it reminds me of the things in the fair, merry-go-round.
Carousels, yeah.
Carousel,
Yes. And then there was a time when someone had laid a shirt over the bits. And she was like, you can't do that. Because cows are very skittish anyways. They're afraid of everything. And she was like, you can't be laying stuff on fences. She was very inquisitive with the animals. And
right on.
And there she would like to have better milk production. All these different things. And where it almost is like we should figure that out.
Right. We can learn. Well, we're not to worship nature. We can learn a lot from it. God created it.
About the one dairy that had the carousel, and it would go real slow, but the cows looked forward. They would just step right up there.
And they're clean.
Yes.
Because they can have a water hose going. While they were being
and they were just like, milk me.
Another natural instinct thing. NASCAR. Oh, look, they're making a left-hand turn. Let's close in Exodus 19, look at some scriptures to end the session on this morning. And as we're about to start that, quick thoughts on Temple Grandin being an atheist, David Rohl being an agnostic. And I'll even tie this into Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel. Atheist, agnostic, yeah, fair enough. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, being told, all these Christians buddying up to you and supporting you, they do want to convert you. He says, yeah, I know, it's okay. I'll be ready for that conversation when it happens. For them to be, and I have such respect for both Temple Grandin and David Rohl, obviously, as we've discussed the reasons why for Temple Grandin, in David Rohl's case, because as an agnostic, he has no problem defending the Bible, for lack of a better phrase, proclaiming the Bible when he sees it actually fits everything that he's seen in his world. There it is. And so he says, just because there are supernatural elements, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, is basically his approach. And my approach would be kind of the same but different. Well, if the Bible is right on so many of these other things, is it really wrong on these things? If it's right on all of this, maybe it's right on the supernatural as well. So I would respectfully love and encourage both of them. As Sister Ashley said, well, if this is true, maybe the Bible is right on other things. So with that, but again, great respect and allowing the Holy Spirit to work and lead everyone individually. Exodus chapter 19, let's close looking at verses 3 through 6. After they've arrived here, Exodus 19, verse 3, and Moses went up to God. And the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, this is what you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the sons of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel. And next week, we'll tie in the 1 Peter chapter 2 connection to that. And I do want to also state, as has been mentioned before, the whole reason the Lord has a people is to be a light and an opportunity for the others. The Israelites were to be a light to the Gentile nations. The church is to be a lighthouse to the rest of the community. And so he's not playing favorites. Scripture says many times, I'm not doing this because y'all are so great. I'm doing this because I love you, and so that my name's not going to be profaned. And I'm going to be true to my name, even if y'all aren't. But God is clearly doing something, starting something, changing the world here, as we'll see with the establishment of the children of Abraham as the Israelite covenant nation under God in this marriage covenant that's taking place here. But it's just a beautiful thing that we're witnessing and reliving and going back to this establishment of God so that there be a people and a place that for all the world to come to, people of every tribe, nation, and tongue, as is talked about in Revelation. But this is a beautiful coming together here that we're going to see just as we come together this afternoon for taking the Lord's Supper together with him, meeting him here at this place he's established. So with those verses and that thought, any other reactions, comments, questions from anyone for this morning? Well, that'll wrap up 2024 for our adult Sunday school class, and we will pick up at this same spot next Sunday next year. So let's go ahead and stop our screen share for this morning, and we'll stop our recording and get ready to go before the Lord in song.